Hi boys, in this video I want to explain methodological differences. You have to understand this and be able to explain it to pass this internal. This is going to be on your test. So when we say methodology, what do we mean in psychology? We're just meaning the methods, the tools, how the researchers go about their data, right? How do they get the numbers? How do they know, right? So we can think of things like, do they get self-report from the participants or are they measuring it directly themselves? Are they relying more on correlational studies or experimental studies? Are they using old-fashioned pen and paper or do they have to use modern technology? And is the data they're getting subjective, so it's open to opinion and bias, or is it objective? Righty? And if we think about it this way, this might help. The theoretical differences between the approaches and the psychologists would be what they tend to study, because that's based on their assumptions for why humans do the things they do. Okay, so biological psychologists would study biology because that's what they assume causes behavior. We're going to look at the methodological differences, how they study it. So let's have a look at some examples. So to make it a little bit more real, okay, we can think of Ledoux and Crockett and Sapolsky and Rain, and these are biological psychologists that use the biological approach. So the methodological differences would require us to first know, well, what tools did these biological psychologists use? And they tend to do things like brain scans in an fMRI or an MRI. They would measure blood and saliva samples to measure hormone levels like noradrenaline or cortisol or oxytocin. They would do genetic testing. So they're studying biological factors through, we could call these direct measures, because it's the researchers getting these numbers, these facts and figures directly from the participants. You could also say they use technological instruments because, we can't self-report our amygdala activity or our noradrenaline levels. And their experiments and their studies tend to manipulate biological factors. And what do I mean by that? Well, they're interested in seeing how biological factors can change behavior. So they're going to manipulate or alter to create these different conditions in an experiment to see if it affects behavior. They might change people's noradrenaline levels, so give one group a noradrenaline injection and the other group no injection. Or they might just do a correlational study and measure the noradrenaline, the biological factor, and see if it affects behavior. So, they're doing biological studies which focus on a biological factor as the potential cause. That's a real basic methodology. All right, but I think here are some of the key terms here: direct measures through brain scans, blood samples, saliva. All right, now if we contrast that with socio-cultural psychologists, all right, who believe that our behavior is based on the environment, well, how do they study that? What methods do they use? And so one common method would be self-report questionnaires. We can't get a direct measure of adverse childhood experiences. The easiest way is, and possibly, the more practical way is to just give people a questionnaire, ask them about their adverse childhood experiences. They fill out a survey. We can't know people's income inequality from a direct measure. We need to ask people, even someone's race, we would ask them to identify it in a questionnaire. Now, they also use observations. So Bandura, in his famous Bobo doll study, observed children in a laboratory, right? So they watch the behavior. Okay, so the observation means they watch it, they see it, and they record it. If we're looking at things like how social interactions can influence stress levels, this is a guy behind a two-way mirror in this bottom left image, and he's making an observation. And we can't do that in the biological approach because we can't see biology. That's why we have to use the technology to measure it. So one methodological difference in social psychology is the use of observations. And they conduct experiments that manipulate social factors. So they would see how, for example, socioeconomic status might affect behavior or PTSD symptoms. So their independent variable, or their potential cause, their hypothetical cause in their studies is social or cultural. Now, if you're looking at the cognitive psychology, again, these are some famous cognitive psychologists, and they believe that our behavior is the product of our thinking. And by the way, the cognitive psychologists often don't focus on actions or behavior at all. They just are interested in the mind. But anyway, I digress. We'll keep it simple. How do these guys study behavior? Same thing, just like biology, in that we can't see your thinking. they have to get it down on paper somehow. They have to design a test that measures cognition in some objective way. And this is where questionnaires might come in. So someone's appraisal style or someone's locus of control, someone's working memory would be done in a test like this, a cognitive test, but we can use other questionnaires to assess their thinking. So again, we're using self-report and focusing mainly on questionnaires. For example, if we're looking at how appraisals might lead to PTSD, we can't see the person's thinking, so we would give them a questionnaire and they would self-report and would see if that correlates or links to PTSD. So I've created this table which should help you contrast the two approaches that you are focusing on, and so you'll need to pick and choose which of the key terms here in bold you're going to focusing on based on which two approaches you're going to write about. Now, allow me to go on a little bit of a rant here. There are no actual differences in the methodologies between these three approaches in real-world psychology. All psychologists use any method that would be available to them. Cognitive psychologists use fMRIs. Cognitive psychologists probably wouldn't use blood tests, but they might if they were looking at maybe working memory could be influenced by cortisol levels, and they were looking at the interaction between those two things. There's just like the approaches in the real psychology world kind of don't really exist. And then that's why this is a little bit contrived, and it's hard for me to explain sometimes because I want to say, I'm kind of explaining this incorrectly because I'm being oversimplistic because all researchers use any method that's available to them. However, for the sake of passing this internal, come back and use these bold terms and hopefully this will make sense. And I do encourage you to be able to add a for example based on what you've been learning about in PTSD. That will help make your explanations clearer and less abstract. So if you start with the general contrast, the psychologist and biological approach would measure internal factors using direct measures like brain scans and saliva. For example, they might measure someone's hyperactivity in the amygdala to see if it's linked with PTSD. On the other hand, a cognitive psychologist might ... That will help you show a better understanding. Okay, I think I can't explain it any more clearly. The next step for you is to write an answer and show me or Ms. Patterson and get feedback. Good luck.